Hello and welcome to the PE Insights podcast, conversations about physical education with me, Nathan Walker. Thank you for joining me. You're very, very welcome. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as we delve into another insight around physical education. Hi everyone, welcome back to the PE Insights podcast. A huge thank you to everyone who's following the podcast and providing me with all the support so far. It means a lot, and I'm glad that this podcast has value for so many of you. It makes doing this completely worthwhile. Today's guest is Shane Pill. Shane is an associate professor at Flinders University in Adelaide, and I am a huge fan. Safe to say, ever since meeting Shane in Hong Kong in 2017, I have been a big fan of his work, and he's influenced and shaped my own practice. And I'm now fortunate enough to be able to share those findings and Shane's work with my trainee teachers. I hope that some of you will know of Shane's work, and if you don't, please reach out and see his wide range of research in physical education and sports coaching. I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I did. There's lots to take away, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. Shane, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome to the PE Insights podcast.
Nathan, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Brilliant. I'm really looking forward to this one because I quite openly, my students know I'm a big fan of the work that you've done. So really looking forward to this conversation. Tell us and the listeners a little bit about yourself and your educational journey.
I'm born and raised on the Adelaide Plains, which is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. The land was never ceded and remains Kaurna people land. Worked at a couple of schools. Was a head of department health and physical education, year level coordinator, sports coordinator, deputy principal. Did that for 18 years, and I was not really wanting to continue on the principal pathway I was at. A job opened up at Flinders University. I applied for that, took leave without pay from my teaching position to try out being in teacher education, and I've now been in teacher education and sports coaching education for 18 years. So 36-year teaching career so far. Across Western Australia, where I started my teaching career, back in South Australia. So that's very briefly my educational journey, my journey as a teacher so far.
Mm-hmm. And I had the privilege of meeting you in Hong Kong at the APEC conference. It was then was it 2016? So quite a while ago now. But tell us briefly about what you're interested in around physical education, apart from all of it.
Yeah. So when I came to Flinders University, I had done a master's in educational leadership, and the thing that I was interested in most at that stage was curriculum leadership. Mm-hmm. How we help as heads of department, the people that we work with, to design practices that power up the learning of students in the limited time that we've got available. I can still remember it was very early on in the weeks of starting at Flinders University, and an associate professor in maths said to me, "Oh, you're the new young bloke in physical education. What's your research area?" And I'm thinking, gee, I don't research. I've just come out of 18 years of teaching. What am I going to say? I said, I'm interested in pedagogy. I've been playing around with this game sense approach the last couple of years in my teaching and my coaching. So I think I'm interested in looking at that, but in the broader sense, my interest is pedagogy. And he looked at me and leant forward a little bit and went, not sports science, not exercise science, not biomechanics, not skill acquisition. I said, no, pedagogy. I'm interested in the art of teaching.
Yeah.
And he went, really? I thought that was a strange thing in a school of education, that someone would be surprised at my interest in how you go about teaching. So since that time, very early on in 2006, when I started at Flinders, I've tried through all my work to maintain a consistent theme of curriculum and pedagogy from a pragmatic perspective.
Yeah, and I love that word, pragmatic. particularly when, in certain educational climates, we're encouraged that one way is the best way. And I love your stance on pragmatism. So why is physical education important to you? Obviously, you've got a love for the subject. Where did that stem from?
This might be slightly ironic. I wanted to be the physio of the Australian cricket team. So coming through secondary school, my aim was to get a good enough tertiary admittance score to do physiotherapy because, there's only one physio of the Australian cricket team. Why couldn't it be me?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I got a calcified thigh from a serious football injury that was mistreated and missed a few weeks of school and never recovered my grades. After that, I've been sitting really, really good grades up until that point in time. But in particular, I was doing double maths and I came back and I looked at the page and just went, I can't make heads or tails of what I've been doing, and had a little bit of a crisis there in my confidence with mathematics. Didn't get the score that I needed to get into physio, and I got the score to get into my second choice, which was secondary physical education. And the reason that was my second choice was because I didn't want to be in an office all day. I was the type of child that would ride a bike and disappear for a while. I wasn't a easily indoors and sit still sort of child. So I thought I wanted a job that had me outdoors, that gave me time off over summer to go to the beach, and teaching ticked all the boxes of flexibility in terms of the number of holidays over the Christmas period, which is our summer. So I'd get to be able to go to the beach, and physical education teaching in particular, because it kept me outdoors. My other strong interest through high school was science. So I trained to be a physical education and science teacher to year 12. So I stumbled, in a sense, into physical education teaching because I didn't get the ATAR into doing what it was I really wanted to do at that time. Turns out, I think, to have been a really good thing. I didn't get the ATAR score because of what I've enjoyed through my time as a physical education teacher. I loved my time going through Teachers College doing a physical education degree, but I equally enjoyed my time learning how to be a science teacher as well. And I would say that even though I've become a teacher and researcher of physical education, I was equally passionate about science teaching at the time that I made the change to Flinders University.
Brilliant. What did you do and what do you still do for movement and enjoyment? And then what are your sport and interests?
Yeah, so through high school, I played Open A tennis for school, first 11 cricket for school, first 18 football. I was in the athletics team as a sprinter, played in the first 5 squash team. So I was a sporty kid, but I wasn't a naturally sporty kid. I was the fat asthmatic kid who couldn't run out of sight if you gave me all day when I was younger. Very allergic to, ironically, grass. Anytime the wind blowed, sinuses would clog up. So I wasn't a naturally athletic child, but I was interested in playing and being active. And through that, when I look back now, I can see that I accumulated a massive amount of informal practice as well as formal practice. And through my teenage years, something clicked and became quite good at those sports. I mean, I didn't have a huge multi-activity background in sport. I played a limited number of sports: squash, tennis, Australian football, cricket, and that gave me a background in an athletic toolkit that meant, could I play tennis? Yes. I look at a table tennis table and go, well, that's got to be easier than tennis, so I can have a go at that.
Yeah.
Badminton, I'd never done badminton before getting to Teachers College, but I could play tennis. Looked at badminton and went, yeah, I can have a go at that. If I can play tennis, I can play that.
Yeah. Do you think it's your positive experiences of like unstructured play and the enjoyment of just through like play and movement that's kind of led you towards the work that you've done around like game sense and games based approaches, or do you think your experience of teaching PE led you to that, or is it a combination of both?
All and neither, all or none. my second teaching job was teaching full-time physical education in a senior school, 10, 11 and 12, the last 3 years of schooling.
Mm-hmm.
And my head of department, Brian Redding, he would start his lessons with a game. I would start my lessons very structured through closed drills into open drills. And if there was time at the end of the lesson, there'd be the application of the practice into the games, because that's how we were taught to teach PE. It was a very procedural, progressive part, pedagogical practice. And I look over at Brian, and Brian would always be starting with a game. Now, I don't think that his class were more skilled at the end of a 5-week unit of work than what my class were, but I would look over at his class and go, I reckon that's the one I would like to be in because they're playing a game.
Yeah.
So I was fighting against the way that I was taught to teach PE at Teachers College, which was very structured, go through your set inductions. So when children come in, they're looking, oh, look at all the markers and everything set up. What are we doing today? And I guess I said, move from that closed to open drill progression with the game finishing at the end of the lesson. And then as part of my football coaching accreditation, I was doing a level 2 coaching course, and I was introduced to some of the ideas of Rick Charlesworth around about the same time that the ideas of Rick Charlesworth were published in the old Sports Coach magazine, that anybody that was an accredited sports coach in Australia got through that accreditation. And Rick Charlesworth was talking about designer games, that a core part of his practice was to have a high volume of game-related practice. And if you were able to get the right game design, you would get your technical, tactical, and fitness stimulus all in the same game. So you didn't need to break out into 3 different practice sessions.
Yeah.
Later on that I read that he was a strong advocate of starting with small-sided gameplay. And a lot of what he wrote was very similar to what 20 years before Eric Worthington had talked about from a soccer coaching perspective. But once you get into academia, the literature paddock opens up to you, so you can find these resources, these writings, and go, gee, they're writing about this back in the 1970s. I'm reading about it in the 1990s and going, this is really progressive practice. I love what Rick Charlesworth was talking about, and then find out that it's a continuation of an idea that is much older. So I think it was this cognitive tension that was provided a solution, which was the game sense approach. So initially I started to trial the game sense approach in my sports coaching, had some success as a sports coach, and then Australia went to a national curriculum in the early 1990s. The states and territories largely designed their own curriculum from that. My school was a trial school for the new standards-based curriculum, which had a very clear emphasis on an inquiry framework. Yeah. So the move to a teacher as a facilitator was very strongly evidenced. I needed a framework that provided that inquiry direction, and the game sense approach, which had been released and was being trialled at that time, provided that inquiry framework for sports teaching that matched what the curriculum was asking the teachers to do. So that's when I started to play around with the ideas in my PE teaching.
Yeah. Where do you stand in terms of like physical education and what it provides children? Because obviously the inquiry is something that we would aim to try and, create opportunities for children to have. Why is physical education as a subject important for young children from your perspective?
I don't know that we can assume that physical education is important to young children. Mm-hmm. What we do know is that a lack of education is important to young children, because the degree of your education is correlated, if not a causation, on the type of job that you get, the way that you go about your dietary requirements, the type of relationships that you would form. If they don't have physical education in their life, will it affect their life outcomes? Maybe, but maybe not if they've got a strong involvement in a sporting club and have got a love of passion of physical activity through that involvement in a sport club. So physical education is one of those subjects that a principal will look out the window and go, yeah, you're doing soccer out there, that's great. We've got a soccer program at the school. Why are we doing that in PE? If the kids really want to do that, they could be joining the school soccer program. Or if the school doesn't have a soccer program, they're going, you know what, there's a soccer club 2Ks down the road. They could be doing that at the soccer club 2Ks down the road if they really want to do that. So we're one of the few subject areas in the curriculum where a principal can look out and go, you know what's happening there is replicated somewhere else. If that's really important to the family, they could be doing it at that somewhere else place. I'm 100% aligned with what Seidentop wrote in the 1970s, that the physical education programs in schools that make a difference have a really strong identity about what they stand for. They stand for sport, or they stand for fitness, or they stand for developing recreational capability, but they can't stand for everything because we don't have enough time to achieve a lot of outcomes. We just did this in a workshop that I was at a school with. So they have in their secondary PE program 2 hours a week for a nominal 40 hours a year. So they've theoretically got 80 hours with their students. Take out management time, transition time, instruction time. It's not 80 hours of active learning time. So if the research tells us that you can achieve one basic movement competency being assessed in a closed situation, not the realistic context of a game, it takes 6 to 10 hours to reach that mastery. They're working in a secondary context, which is talking about the application of specialised movement skills. Kenneman's work and others would suggest it takes around 20 hours to develop one thing to competency. Well, if they've got 80 hours a year, they've got 4 things that they can develop to competency.
Not a lot.
That's not a lot. But the schools that make a difference in the physical activity patterns of their kids have made a strong commitment to what those things will be, and they go really hard and deep on those things, and they will make a difference then to the lives of their children, because the children have had the volume of practice through repetition that gives them the confidence in the competence of those things that they've done. But the research is really clear that there's a continuation in a lot of settings of a physical education that provides a lot of experiences, but not a lot of learning. So therefore, the children that were already perceiving a lack of ability in an activity only have that confirmed during the activity. So we haven't encouraged them into participation. We've actually confirmed in their minds, this is not an opportunity for me because I'm no good at it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the whole predication that physical education is good and useful is something that we find a lot of cheerleading around, but we actually have to have, as Ken Alexander wrote in a couple of papers, Ken Alexander took Daryl Seidentop's work to Australia as the CPEP approach. He said, there's some secrets that we're not prepared to talk about in a profession. The multi-activity curriculum model doesn't teach skill, doesn't promote lifelong physical activity participation, is not highly valued by schools. Otherwise, they would be giving us equal time in the curriculum to other subjects. But we want to persist with it. We have to ask questions. Are we part of the physical activity solution? Because globally, we can see that young people today are less movement competent than their great-grandparents were. And their great-grandparents weren't doing a multi-activity curriculum model. And often there wasn't a physical education teacher in the school in those days. Certainly not a trained physical education teacher, because in many countries, a degree called physical education didn't exist up until sometime in the 1950s or 1960s. So they were more movement competent than today's generation that goes through 10 years of compulsory physical education. Why is that? Well, because they played a lot more. They played a lot more sport.
Yeah. So I'm thinking from a UK perspective where we have that, a requirement or a suggestion. No, it is a requirement to have a broad range of physical activities, and schools will push for having all of these different options, opportunities for young children. But then that kind of leads into being like a mile wide and an inch thick and never really delving into a particular topic with enough depth to really ingrain rich learning. And I think that's what you kind of alluded to there. I'd love to talk to you about your book that you've authored with Brendan Susie on Mosston and Ashworth. because I speak, it's really interesting this. I go into schools quite often, Shane, and I speak to PE teachers that maybe graduated 20 years ago, and they're like, oh yeah, Mosston Ashworth, the teachers' styles, and it was something that they remembered and something that they quite often talk about. But then it's kind of phased out a little bit, and it's almost being kind of reintroduced from my perspective as to, our trainees. I will often deliver this to my trainees now in terms of increasing their awareness of Mosston and Ashworth. So I think it would be a really good opportunity for you to maybe talk a little bit about that and maybe its application in practice.
Again, it's one of these really interesting stories. I knew nothing about Mosston and Ashworth's spectrum of teaching styles and the work of Musker Mosston prior to coming to Flinders University. It wasn't part of my teacher education, wasn't part of any professional development that I'd done through any courses in the first 18 years of my teaching. But I come to Flinders University, and my colleague Russell Brown was using the spectrum of teaching styles as the pedagogical foundation for all our first year students. And I was asked to audit Russell's topic in first year to provide him some feedback, because I'd just come out of schools and he wanted to know if the things that he was doing were still current. And I looked at that and gone, that's a really great framework. I'm pursuing research and teaching and thinking about a game sense approach, being very play practice, which was the direction of the Australian Sports Commission at that time for sport-related coaching and teaching, and fit with the standards and outcomes-based curriculum that we had. So I didn't think much about it after that. And then in 2009 at the Ashburn International Conference, Sarah Ashworth gave a keynote, run some workshops, and I thought that's really interesting. But again, I didn't think much of it until Brendan Soucy got in contact with me, and Brendan said that he'd been thinking about a game-based approach and seen that myself and others had described it as discovery or guided discovery pedagogy. And Brendan's going, I reckon you're wrong. It's not discovery, it's practice style pedagogy. It could be discovery, but if we look at the descriptions of a constraints-led approach in most of the books or a game-based approach in most of the books, what's being described is practice style pedagogy. Oh, that's really interesting. Explain more to me. And so then he started to talk from a spectrum of teaching styles, analysis of the pedagogical behaviour that was described within the descriptions of the activities. And I went, you're right. At no stage is the teacher ever asking these people to create something. And if they are asking to create, there's no ability to order whether this is new knowledge, because there's been no retrieval practice and documentation of everything they already know, do, understand. So just asking them to go and solve a problem could actually be retrieval practice of what they already know or have some familiarity through watching on the TV. That's not creating, so it's not discovery. And so we wrote this paper about reconciling approaches, doing an analysis of a game-based approach through a spectrum of teaching styles, and looking at when a game-based approach was retrieval practice and when it was actually challenging people into one of the production styles from the spectrum of teaching style. And we've since done a fair bit of work through them. Now, about the same time that Brennan was contacting me from a teaching perspective, I was having conversations with Mitch Hewitt, who was using the spectrum of teaching styles to audit tennis coaches' pedagogy, and whether the tennis coaches who were saying, yeah, I'm a game-based coach, my practice is game-based, and whether that belief and their philosophy was actually observed in their practice and therefore experienced by their players. And he found that despite the intention to be game-based, despite having a philosophy of being athlete-centred, the coaches were still command and practice style coaches, but thought they were being game-based. And I think what we understand, what I understand a lot more clearly from working with Brendan and Mitch is it's okay for a game to be retrieval practice if that's the intention, to make the current capability, knowledge and understanding visible, which is a useful thing for a coach or a teacher to do in order to get the information to plan where to go to next. But if it's about the discovery and therefore the creativity piece, there's a different set of instructions that need to occur in order to get the students into that zone of creativity. We have to very clearly know what the students know, do, and understand, and say, here's everything that you currently can do, that you currently think about. You can't use any of that in order to solve this problem.
Wow.
And
So it has to be like truly original. It has like
correct.
what it
And
has
only
to be.
then are we moving into a production cluster. Only then are we being creative.
Yeah.
Because creativity builds on what we already know, do, and understand. It takes us to another space.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, a lot of the times when people say, oh, my students are being creative, what they're actually doing is applying in a novel way what they already know and can do.
Mm.
They actually haven't created any new way of understanding or doing.
I love what you said about retrieval practice, because obviously practicing, evidence-informed practice in the UK at the minute is encouraging retrieval practice. What Rose and Shine talks about, recall of prior knowledge. But a lot of, from my perspective and our trainees' perspective, the way they interpret that is, I've got to ask questions of declarative knowledge at the start of my lesson. So I've got to, glean from them what they can tell me they know. But I think what you're advocating for here is the fact that they could use a small-sided game structure at the start of their lesson as retrieval practice, because they are demonstrating knowledge, understanding, and skills through that setting. And I think if we take what is deemed as effective in the classroom, and then we go and see examples of what's effective retrieval practice in the classroom, it might be through like questions and quizzes and whiteboard tasks and that sort of stuff. But in PE, it has the potential to be far more practical, right?
Correct.
So what? And if in a this is maybe quite challenging, but in a nutshell, could you explain Mosston and Ashworth? So if someone who's never heard of Mosston and Ashworth spectrum of teaching styles before, how would you describe it to them?
The spectrum is a philosophy where there is no wrong teaching style. So it is a non-versus lens on teaching styles. It challenges the mastery of a teacher or sports coach with the selection of a teaching style to align to the attainment of a task outcome with those players. But a teaching style of itself is never right or wrong, just wrongly applied. It's a practice of ability within the spectrum. That mobility is being able to move through the production and reproduction cluster of styles to choose the style which is right for the educational outcome that you are desiring from the task. Mm-hmm. So sometimes a task might be a cluster of styles, not one style of its own.
Right.
Sometimes it might be one style on its own, but you might use multiple styles during a lesson or a coaching session. It's also about this notion that it's intentional, which I love, because I saw a game-based approach being misused as, we're playing games, we're playing small-sided games, so we're doing a game-based approach. No, you're playing small-sided games. It becomes a game-based approach when those games have an educative intent, and you're using those games in an educative way. So you actually know what it is that game is setting out to teach. And going back to the work of Eric Worthington from 1974, he would say in his book, it is said that the master coach knows the teachable moment is going to occur, and waits for the teachable moment because they've designed this game knowing that moment will occur. There's other things that they might want to talk about, but that's not what the game was there for. They wait for the moment, and then the teaching comes in. So we have this intentional, purposeful, explicit design phase that occurs at pre-impact, where we are using our understanding of what the students know, do, and understand to design a practice for it might be a practice to consolidate their learning. It might be a practice to extend their learning. It might be a practice to bring them into a completely new situation for novel and unique creation. But we go into our planning to design that. That's the pre-impact. Then the impact phase is where our intentions are realised or not. And that's the reflection piece post-impact. that comes in the end? Did we get the alignment from teaching style or pedagogy to the task to get the outcome for the learners that we're hoping for?
Okay. And that links to the pragmatism point at the start, right? So an understanding of the best approach for the context that you're in. When you talked about go on.
It's also not often talked about, but most curriculum frameworks around the world come from a constructivist perspective. When I started teaching, we would say that they came from a behaviourist perspective, where the reproduction of the coach or the teacher's demonstration was what we were looking for from our learner, and the closer the closer the reproduction that the student did to our demonstration, the better that they were. We're now, from a constructivist perspective, going, we actually need to have a full realisation of what that person knows, does, and understand, to build from there, to construct from there. Whereas before, we would go in and go, I don't care what you know, do, or understand. This is what I think we're doing today, how to do it, why to do it, and you just do it. Behave in a particular way. So I think Mosston's spectrum of teaching style aligns really well with the constructivist intent of curriculum around the world, that we actually need to know the learner and then be intentional with our pedagogy to enable that learner to grow, to change. That's what learning requires, change, so that the learner can know, do, or understand differently tomorrow than what they do today.
Yeah. And like the social reciprocation part of it as well, that social constructivism, so the knowledge shared between the peers is vitally important as well. So you talked about
there's the personal cognitive dimension to it.
Yeah.
And then there's also the social constructivism, where we're doing that with understanding with others.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you talked about clusters. Now, my sort of understanding of it would be that some styles wouldn't work with each other, possibly. Let's just say if we're at one end of the spectrum to the other, could you do direct instruction with self-learning? Would that be an effective cluster? Or when you talk about clusters, do you mean that it's at different points within the lesson that those styles could be used? Or is it a combination of both at the same time?
Where will I start with that one? Because there was a fair bit in that question. If we go down to style K, which is completely self-coaching, and we give this example in the book, you can imagine a situation where I am designing my learning environment.
Okay.
So that's style K. I am fully responsible for it. But the design engages me with practice style, because everything is reproductive. Here it is, go and do it, and I do it for 10 minutes. So I might set up like a practice gym, and I'm doing it against the wall here and then doing something else over there. So I'm actually involved in practice style pedagogy. But I started off with style K, self-coaching, because I've designed this based on what I think I need. So yes, we then get a cluster from both ends of the spectrum. It could be that we're using a task card, and the task card has a self-check. But the self-check has come in an episode where we start off doing practice. So the teacher or the coach is given a task, go away and do it, practice a little bit, now come back and self-check. So we've got self-check and practice in the one learning task.
In the one task, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So they can merge together, and they will naturally merge together depending on what's happening and the responses to the task. Yeah,
exactly. And down the other end in the production cluster, we might start off with a very divergent discovery process to explore the possibilities, and then bring it back to a convergent process. So convergent style, because we want to come to an answer that is best for our group, or we have a particular style that we want to play. So in a coaching, we've got Walker's way of playing, and Walker's way of playing is so everybody can be cognitively attuned to each other. So that brings an anticipation of our teammate, which gives us a performance advantage, because we can anticipate what our player is going to do because we're playing Walker's way.
Yeah.
The other opposition don't know that, so they can't anticipate. We get the advantage. So we start off divergently exploring the possibilities, but then Walker wants us to play a particular way. which means we bring the discovery back to the convergent way of doing it so that it aligns with the Walker way of playing.
Okay. And then that could be almost narrowing towards an intended learning objective, let's just say. So if
Correct.
you started with this really sort of open lesson where there was no sort of focus on an objective, and you let them explore, and then you bring it towards an intended learning objective, and that would be an example of that, of how it might be used.
Yes.
Wow. I think you've done another, like I said earlier, really good job of explaining something that's quite complex to a really sort of understandable and comprehensible level. So you work in teacher education, Shane. What are you encouraging PE teachers to do every single day in their practice or in their daily lives? What are your golden nuggets for them?
The first one would be that players want to play. And so therefore, working with the natural instinct of the majority of humans, which is to explore and play, a play-based approach to physical education is intuitively attractive. Mm-hmm. Then to bring that into a strong pedagogical framing so that it is strongly guided rather than weakly guided, because the evidence is that strongly guided leads to good learning effect, weakly guided leads to nothing more than chance. And as professionals, I don't think it's good enough that we lead learning outcomes to osmosis or by chance.
Absolutely.
So it's a strongly guided approach. So therefore, we need to be planning our questioning, our inquiry strategies as explicitly as what we are planning the activities, because the activities are the shell, the games are the shell, the vehicle for the learning that we do, mm-hmm. or the learning that we want the students to do. So in my 36 years of teaching, the best teachers I've come across are always great planners. That doesn't mean they have detailed planning documents, but I can go back to their planning and see great thinking. Their planning is explicit, and they actually know the journey that they're trying to take their students on. They have a really strong sense of pre-testing, whether that be in an informal or formal way. So they have great understanding of where their student's starting point is at. Mm-hmm. That enables them to differentiate the learning outcomes to the readiness variety they have in their group. And they're actually able to be accountable for where the students get to by the end of it, because their post-test can tell them really clearly whether anything has changed from their pre-test. So data is our friend. That's the second one. So play-based. Data is our friend because it enables us to do the design piece with intention. Mm-hmm. The other one is we have to be really, really clear about what we stand for, because we've known for 30-odd years that a multi-activity curriculum model is the antithesis of getting strong learning outcomes in physical education. And as I said earlier, I aligned with what Seidentop wrote about in the 1970s. Strong physical education programs know what they stand for and go strong on that stance. And so we know that repetition is required to provide the volume of practice that moves things into habituation, and habituation is where we get the evidence of learning. So a multi-activity curriculum model might be able to provide that repetition for learning if it's concept-based. And we're not really doing soccer to learn soccer. Soccer becomes representative of invasion games, and there's a core group of concepts or big ideas that we learn here, and then those big ideas are further conceptually developed when we go into team handball, are further conceptually developed when we go into basketball, because basketball is just a vehicle to develop really strong game understanding of invasion games.
Yeah.
We're not incensed. We are under no illusion that in 5 weeks we can actually teach people to be better basketball players, because we can't. But if we want a program that gives people strong confidence in their competence to play basketball, we'll be treating basketball like science treats its big concepts. We're doing it every year. Mm-hmm. As a science teacher, this is the example I like to use. We teach cell theory to 5-year-olds. Living things are made of cells. non-living things, not made of cells. That's how we tell the difference between something that's living and something that's not living.
Yeah.
Cell theory. Cell theory is introduced to 5-year-olds. Cell theory is in the curriculum every year because it's a big idea of biology. So by the time I'm teaching Year 12 biology, I'm dealing with really sophisticated cell chemistry and cell biology. And I'm able to do that because cell theory has been coherently progressed in complexity every year from grade 5.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't do that because it's science. We do that because that is good educational theory. So we should be applying good educational theory to PE.
Right. I'm not intentionally asking this question to trip you up, right? So prepare for this. What then might the big ideas be in physical education from your perspective?
That's a great question. And I think that's work that we haven't done in phys ed. I noticed that some of my Australia and New Zealand colleagues in outdoor education have been attempting to identify what they call the threshold concepts, the big ideas that go right through the education and then continue on into tertiary education as well. I don't think we've done that work yet. I think it would be a really good PhD. I suggest a Delphi project, a Delphi style method would be a really good way of going about it. However, if we come back to the Australian curriculum for health and PE, we have focus areas.
Yeah.
So they're a de facto type of big idea that goes through the curriculum. So, for example, recreation is a big idea. You might call it leisure.
Yeah.
Games and sport are another big idea. So in our curriculum, we have to teach games and sport. We also have to teach recreation. Now, sport may be a recreation activity. So sport can come across as games and sport for that competitive process. But games and sport can also be for recreational outcomes. But recreation is a different idea to games and sport as most people think of that, which is the more competitive-based pathway.
Yeah.
Fundamental movement skills. Now, movement fundamentals, fundamental motor skills, general movement competency, that's another big idea of our field.
Yeah. That's the one that kind of sprung to mind for me. That was the most maybe common sense one in terms of movement competence, perhaps without broad brush term of common sense there. But it's like fundamental movement skills. If everything is about movement, that could be a big idea that starts from the very beginning and goes all the way through. Everything should be about movement, developing movement competency or relationship with movement. Physical literacy, is that too big an idea? I don't know, but I like the idea of having big themes or big ideas or concepts that are delved into in greater depth than that wide, inch thick sort of approach that sometimes happens. And are those big ideas context specific? So could a school focus on different concepts to another school because of their, if we go back to your seed and top quote, what they believe in? Might their big ideas be different to another school's big ideas?
Yeah, if you don't have a curriculum you have to follow, like in Australia, we've got the curriculum that we have to follow. And so therefore, in a sense, the focus areas become our big ideas that organise our curriculum. If you don't have that, then you're open to narrow down to stand for something very, very specific. And that might be physical fitness. I'm personally not in favour of that. That focus on physical training, I don't see that as providing the self-determination and self-regulation that's needed to be an independent activity seeker.
Right.
Because you're always looking for where's the instructor that's going to take the class. So I see our role as developing movement competence, so you can be the independent, self-regulated learner. So you understand the process of learning. So that's the Arnoldian perspective of we teach for education in movement to give the confidence in our competence to see spaces and places as opportunities for physical activity. We educate through movement so we can do that positively, collaboratively and cooperatively with others. And we educate about movement so we have the capacity to be independently self-regulated and self-motivated because we know enough about how our body works we know enough about learning that we can take some initiative as learners.
Yeah, I think we do, and don't get me wrong, that we have a curriculum for physical education in the UK that we have to follow, right? We have, broad range of activities, developing competence, confidence and movement, healthy active lifestyles, opportunities for competition. They're like the 4 aims of national curriculum for PE, right? So there might be the 4 big ideas, but I wonder whether, going back to your point around sitting top and identity of your PE curriculum in a school, that you might have ones that carry more value for you in your setting whilst trying to achieve all those 4 things. But again, I think that's probably a bigger conversation and a bigger topic to discuss in 45 minutes on a podcast. Shane, I've loved having a chat with you. Again, I will be signposting this podcast to my first year trainees. I think it's the 3rd lecture they have as first year undergraduates on our PE degree is when I introduced them to Mosston Ashworth and signpost the book. So I particularly place, quite an importance in the spectrum in terms of like an understanding. So I'll make sure that they listen to this. And I hope that anyone who's listened to this conversation has taken some of the key messages away from Shane, because he's got tons of knowledge and lots of valuable things to share with us as physical educators and sports coaches. Shane, thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and chat about something we're both passionate in.
Yeah, thank you very much, and hope you've enjoyed the episode. And don't forget to share your thoughts as you see fit.